And let's move on to Duran Duran.
Let's.
So, Duran Duran, Rio. In the opening montage, you heard Hungry Like the Wolf. And now you're going to hear the last track, The Chauffeur.
Way down the lane away, living for another day. The eighth that's home up in the drifting haze. Swing seagull in the sky towards that hollow western isle. My envy lady holds you fast in her gaze. And the sun drips down, bedding heavy behind the front of your dress, all shadowy lined, and the droning engine throbs in time with your beating heart.
All right, Statty Matty, what is the
That's a good one.
stats on this album?
The stats on Rio from Duran Duran. This comes in at number 92 in the 1980s on Best Ever Albums, number 8 in 1982, number 600 of all time. It is Duran Duran's highest-rated album on Best Ever Albums, and it also did not make Rolling Stone's list.
Okay. All right. Well, I feel like I got a lot of good stuff this week for this band, surprisingly. It kind of like went all over the place. There's a lot of fun things. And I feel like this band, in a way, really unlocks the 80s or the early 80s as a pop phenomenon, and Duran Duran's kind of intertwining and reliance on MTV and music video format as a way to really boost their celebrity and their popularity. I think they are kind of a standard and a hallmark for that sort of thing. So I really enjoyed reading about them this week. This is their second album. It was released May 10th, 1982, and they were a band that formed in Birmingham, England in 1978, started by keyboardist Nick Rhodes and bassist John Taylor. Early on, they went through numerous lineup changes, even before their first album was released, but eventually they settled on the lineup that appears on this album and on their debut self-titled album. We have Roger Taylor on drums. He joined in 1979. Guitarist Andy Taylor joined in 1980, and singer Simon Le Bon solidified the lineup in May of 1980. So there's 3 Taylors on this album, none related. They're all just happen to be British Taylors.
Isn't that
thought
crazy?
that was funny.
Yeah.
There's a lot of Taylors in rock music, aren't there? Like
Who
James
else?
Taylor, Mick Taylor from
Mick
the
Taylor.
Stones. Yep. So Taylor Dane, the R&B singer. Taylor Hawkins. But, yeah. Anyway,
Okay,
continue.
well, just pop in when you think of other ones.
I'll just keep saying every 10
Oh,
words.
he
I'll
will.
just say the Taylor. Yeah. Continue.
They started getting attention while touring Birmingham and London in 1980, and resulted in a bidding war between EMI and Phonogram, the record companies, and eventually they settled on EMI. And EMI, yes, was that the Sex Pistols song?
Sex Pistols, yeah.
Around this time, the New Romantic movement started, and I'm going on a tangent with the New Romantics here. We've name-checked this a little bit in the past.
Shout out superfan Jeff, who
Yes.
is his favorite version of music. So
Oh, okay, interesting. So I'm going to define it here so we know what we're talking about. And Duran Duran eventually got kind of lumped in with the New Romantic movement as well, and it actually started as a fashion subculture from the club scene in Birmingham and London in the late 70s. So it's fashion first, and then the music kind of came associated with it later. It's characterized by flamboyant and eccentric fashion inspired by the glam movement of Bowie, T-Rex, and Roxy Music, combined with the romantic period of the 18th and 19th century, which was, literature and art and all of that, which emphasized emotion and individualism, among other things. And androgyny and gender bending was also part of the fashion. So think of music acts that became associated with it were ones like Spandau Ballet, Duran Duran,
Adam
Flock
and
of
the Ants. Right?
Yep, Adam
Those
and the
were-
Ants, Flock of Seagulls, Boy George, and those are all examples of kind of, if you think of what they look like and their fashion on the music videos and things like that.
Orchestral Maneuvers in the Dark, were they
Yeah.
another? Yeah, okay.
I don't know. Yeah,
Okay,
maybe.
not sure. Okay.
But those are kind of the standouts. There were other ones as well. Ultravox sometimes got lumped in as being part of the New Romantics, even though they didn't.
Flock of Seagulls, are they New
Yep.
Romantic?
Yes,
Yeah.
I
Okay.
said them.
Did you mention that? I'm sorry, I missed it.
Yeah,
I apologize.
it's okay. And the new romantic bands also often use synthesizers, so it kind of also became associated with synth pop, and that coupled with all of these bands making music videos made them quite popular in the early days of MTV. They all featured heavy rotation in that, and that contributed to it as well. However, because this was kind of a UK movement, the New Romantics was more of a UK thing for a while, and it didn't really cross over as much in the US. So back to Duran Duran. Their first album was self-titled and came out June 15th, 1981, and featured the singles Planet Earth, Careless Memories, and Girls on Film, which controversially was sexually provocative and got a lot of people up in arms, and the BBC eventually banned it and released an edited version, and I watched the video.
Yeah, the video had naked ladies in it, didn't it?
Well, they weren't, they were scantily clad, and there was a lot of like sexually suggestive stuff.
I thought they had a topless version.
Oh,
anyway.
Okay, well, I watched the official version that's on YouTube, so maybe I didn't watch the regular one, but this worked in MTV's favor because they played the unedited version, and it generated a lot of publicity for them and drew eyes to the channel, and it would play constantly on the channel. All of their singles on this album, and pretty much going forward, all had music videos, so they were one of the first bands to kind of capitalize on that and use that as a marketing tactic. Later in 81, they toured in the US and Germany, and then back in the UK again. And by 1982, they were getting worldwide recognition and released this album on May 10th of 82. This album was a hit in the UK, and they became a sensation. It had 4 singles, all have reached the top 10 in the UK. The album peaked at number 2 in the UK. Rio, Hungry Like the Wolf, My Own Way, and Save a Prayer were the singles. They headlined in Australia and Japan and US on the tours, and then they toured in the US again as the opening act for Blondie, and Princess Di named them her favorite band, and the British press started calling them the Fab Five in homage to the Beatles.
Very fitting.
Yeah,
they're Princess Di's favorite band. Interesting.
Yep. However, the album did not do well in the US at first, since EMI kind of promoted them as the new romantic band, and that was only in the UK, and US audiences didn't really know what that was. Capitol Records, which was the EMI's American subsidiary or brand extension, was didn't know how to market them. But in the fall of 82, they released an album called Carnival, which was really an EP of dance remixes of Rio by David Kirschenbaum, who was a producer, and that became popular with DJs. So then, because of that, Capitol kind of marketed them as a dance band, and Duran Duran pushed them to re-release the album remixed and remastered by Kirschenbaum with new mixes. So the re-release, coupled with heavy MTV airplay, pushed them into the top 20 on the Billboard in the US, eventually peaking at 6 and staying on the charts for 129 weeks. So really, like, late 82 into 83 and 84, like, this was like the prime time for Duran Duran.
Yep.
They were one of the first bands to also remix their own albums and be part of that process, so you can hear that. You can hear the US mixes, the Carnival versions, and there's also night versions, quote unquote, which were B-sides to the club's vinyl mixes. You can hear all of that on the collector's edition of Rio, which was on Amazon Music, and so I kind of listened to those different things, and that's interesting if you're into that sort of thing.
I listen to multiple, but each time I listen to a different version, Josh. So
Yeah.
a little context on that too.
And sometimes it's obvious, especially with the dance mixes. It's very like just a lot of the music before the lyrics come in, or repeats and stuff. But some of the stuff is kind of gradual, in my opinion, in terms of
Like the
subtle.
Manchester Square demos, is that?
Yeah.
that stood out. Yes.
So the There is some experimentation by the band on this album. There's a fretless bass on Lonely in Your Nightmare. There's an interesting repeating sequencer track on Save a Prayer that you can hear if you listen to it. And on Chauffeur, it's all electronic except for the ocarina. And they also...
The ocarina?
Yeah, the ocarina, the little like flute type of instrument.
Okay. Yeah.
And that's why I picked it. I like the ocarina on that song for the opening. And they also intersperse sound effects throughout the album, kind of like the beginning of Rio has kind of a weird, interesting like tape loop, and there's some weird things going on there. John Taylor actually thought up the title of the album during their 81 tour and thought the album wanted the album to evoke the feeling of a Brazilian carnival and spirit. Can't talk about this album without the cover of the album being a kind of iconic cover and recognizable. It's by the artist Patrick Nagel and his trademark style known as the Nagel Woman, and it's considered one of the greatest album covers, if not one of the most recognizable. It's a very distinct artistic style, and sometimes so cited as the quintessential 1980s woman on the front. Also, kind of different, the band doesn't appear on the front or the back of the album, which was kind of par for the course at the time. They instead were on the inside LP of the liner of that. So I've got a lot of post stuff that is interesting. So let's talk about the album, though. So who is it? Matt, were you hungry like the wolf for Duran Duran listening to it this time?
So yeah, this is a very interesting album for me because not only is this, Duran Duran is probably my first like actual artist that I loved. It was like my first favorite band was when I was Duran Duran, and this album Rio was maybe the first, or it's the second. I think the first album that I ever owned was Arena, which was a live album.
Yes,
that came out after Seven and the Ragged Tiger, which is the album after this. So it's like a midi, and I loved the song Wild Boys, which is the single off of that. And so then I went back and I got this probably a few months later for like my birthday or something. So, so I've known this album as long as I've known any album, really. And it's also interesting because I listen to it all the time because it's one of the only albums I ever had, right? But then like when CDs came and like I never got this on CD and I never really listened to it again. So coming back and listening to it this week was like talk about nostalgia, just like holy crap, like I forgot, like it's an album that I know really well, but I also totally forgot about in many ways, except for stuff like Rio and Hungry Like the Wolf and Save a Prayer, certain like singles or whatever. So so a lot of the other songs on here it was a very interesting listen. So so I still like Duran Duran. I still like this album. Some things that kind of jumped out at me that I never remember really thinking about before. First and foremost, the bass. The bass is prominently placed in many of these songs, and I'm like here, it's like there's a lot of funk slapping bass that's happening here, almost like a. And I know they worked with Nile Rodgers. I saw that he produced, he has produced some of their stuff. So like it definitely has like a chic kind of element to it. But there's a lot of that, that the bass just being very prominent up there, which I liked. I noticed. I still feel like with My Own Way and Lonely in Your Nightmare, those are songs that like I like the songs, but they're the songs I like the verses. The choruses I think are kind of weak and overly repetitive. But they also have their own interesting thing. Like Lonely in Your Nightmare's got like a interesting kind of like jangle REM kind of guitar in it that I never really picked up on before, that this is like, oh, this is kind of like a new wave kind of jangle pop guitar, but it's definitely there. So I'm like, well, that makes sense that they were doing that as well. I just never really put two and two together like that before. I've always really liked, probably my favorite song on here is Save a Prayer. I really like that. I love the bridge of that song. And then the deeper cuts like Hold Back the Rain, Last Chance on the Stairway. Those are really upbeat, really fun, songs. My guess, I'm interested to hear your guys' thoughts on the lyrics. My guess is that the lyrics are not very, to me, they don't seem very good overall. I will say that. And maybe that's a no-brainer, but to me, I hear some of this stuff, I'm like, what the hell is he talking about? Like, so, And I'm not a huge fan. There's some of the songs that he's doing, like Simon Le Bon gets a little too into the scatting at the end of the songs, which I kind of feel is a little annoying and a little like, what's he talking about? Just skip over this. You don't need to do this. So there's a couple of moments that I'm not that huge on. But overall, I mean, this album is like, is my childhood. This is the music I listened to when I was like 7 years old. Some of the first music I listened to comes back to this, and it was fun going back and listening to it as like a 44-year-old guy, like almost 40 years later, and like my take on it. So I still do like it, and I'm a thumbs up. Oh, I will also say it's interesting you picked The Chauffeur, because that was the one song I never really listened to as a kid, because I would listen to it and I'm like, man, this is really slow, and it's like 5.5 minutes long. There's no like hook to it really, so I liked listening to it this week because I was like, that's a much better song than I ever gave it credit for. But I in my head, I wasn't ready for it or just really cared to listen to it back then. But I don't think there's not a bad song on here. There's just some moments that I would probably like, all right, could take some time off of this, or maybe you could stop the scatting or whatever. But overall, no, it's very, very solid. I'm thumbs up.
Nice. You mean you don't like do 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 or da 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 or variations of that?
It's not even that. It's like when he's like, "Hoo ha Broadway, come to get to like whatever that song is. If that's is that My Own Way? I think that's on My Own Way. Perhaps it's just like ugh.
So a little bit of context along the way. I don't know if I ever would have listened to a Duran Duran album, right, without doing this podcast. Because to me, Duran Duran operates in three contexts, right? Like, they are a singles band, they are a music videos band, and they are when you want to encapsulate the sound of the early to mid 80s, just pick, The Reflex or Rio or Girls on Film or Wild Boys, or what I mean? Like, it's like you could score that in any sort of like generic 80s thing, and it's like, there you go, that's the sound of what it is, right? So it was interesting to listen to a full Duran Duran album. With that being said, I don't know if my take on Duran Duran varied from what I thought on Duran Duran was going to be. The new romantic movement in general, but Duran Duran always feels to me like a commercial product to some degree. Like, I listen to it and it feels like detached and technically proficient, but there is no emotional resonance with these songs. They exist, but like they don't hit any part of my emotional domain. I think that's why when they reinvented themselves in the 90s and they made like Come Undone and stuff that seemed to have a little bit more heart, kind of, I thought it was interesting. Or Ordinary World, right? Those songs had a little bit more heft to them, I think probably by design. These songs there were songs like New Religion that I really enjoyed and I wasn't super familiar with it, or My Own Way, and I'm like, oh, these have really good musical parts. Like you said, Matt, the bass stood out, the slap bass, the sort of freeform bass. I'm not a huge Simon Le Bon fan vocally or style, like you mentioned. I think the thing that holds me back with them a little bit is there is no emotional connection with me on these songs. Like, if I'm listening to Rio, like, I have no concept. The only concept I have of Rio is the music video of like the woman on the bow of the boat, right? You know what I mean? Right. The only concept I have of Hungry Like the Wolf is the band in like high fashion in a theoretical jungle. I don't create my own soundscapes with these musics, right? Like, it's visions, right? I think that's why the videos were so important, because they basically gave you the visual with it. Yep. We talked before about, Steely Dan and what we were calling yacht rock or stuff like that. New Romantic is a tough genre for me because I feel iced out a little bit. Now, with that being said, this album is right in the middle for me, in the fact that there are guitar parts in this and bass parts that I really like. Musically, there's a lot of interesting stuff going on. Synthesizer wise, it's another extremely well produced album.
Yeah, definitely.
Most everybody I think knows Hungry Like the Wolf, and I would argue Rio, right? I mean, those songs were omnipresent for a while, so you kind of stumble into them without knowing it. I think that they have a little bit of a problem of going too long on their songs.
Yes,
Rio, My Own Way, New Religion, Save a Prayer, The Chauffeur. I mean, most of this album, I'm like, all right, and like the last minute of every song is kind of superfluous, I think, oftentimes, because it's when Simon Le Bon and the band sort of break down into like an interlude or scat, and it doesn't seem like it needs to be there sometimes, I feel like, in my opinion. They're also an interesting band in that when they write a hook that's big, like Hungry Like the Wolf, it's there, but then, like you mentioned, Matt, some of their songs are oddly hookless in a way, and it's weird that you could write like Girls on Film, or which is not on this album, but I just thought of that as or the Reflex or stuff, these big brass hooks, right? And then have other songs that kind of meander without a hook.
New Moon on Monday. Do you know that song? Oh, that's got a great hook. It's like a perfect
you get
pop
what I'm
hook.
sayand they'll write like these great pop hooks, and then they'll write these songs that like are hookless, kind of.
Lonely in Your Nightmares is a letdown of a chorus,
Yeah, and it's rare you see a band that is so hook heavy on some of their songs go so hook.
That's a good point.
Not on others. Like you usually, if you're a band that's hook heavy, even if I don't necessarily love your hooks, you kind of run with those hooks along the way, right? Whereas if you're not hook heavy, that's kind of like you either have to bring it in another area, or that's kind of weakness of your album, right? So that's kind of my initial take. I get the feeling from your enthusiasm, Josh, though, that you really like this one.
No, actually, I kind of in the middle, and I kind of went back and forth too. Initially, I was like, well, this album sounds pretty formulaic. It felt like Le Bon was singing the same way, and when they got to the chorus, it would always kind of like build to the chorus in the same way and taper off, and then, like you said, the songs went long, and they would end kind of on instrumentals or almost like the choruses repeated too many times at some point, and the songs started running together for me too, because they sounded so similar. I think it happened due to the synth maybe, or the just kind of the way the songs are structured. But like Hungry Like the Wolf right into Hold Back the Rain, and the start of Hold Back the Rain just kind of reminded me of Hungry Like the Wolf in the tone and the sound. So I felt that over and over again. But then the more I listened to it, I guess this is a testament to their kind of pop sensibility. I would find myself singing the choruses and like singing along, or there would be certain things that I liked that I would hear and tap my feet to and things like that. So I kind of understand why they were so popular, because they were, in the way that Pat Benatar and some of those other pop bands, they are like perfectly accessible. They are very specific, and I think it's a testament to their music videos too, is that the look and describing like and having the music videos as like reinforcement of what they were about really like helped them. And I think that helped all of the New Romantics, because if it's a fashion movement, you want to see what they're wearing and kind of like what that's about. It's imagery as well as the sound. So I mean, Hungry Like the Wolf and Rio are like great songs that you will always sing, or I will always sing along to and always know, and they have songs later on, specifically View to a Kill, which I cannot get out of my head anytime I hear it, and I'll talk a little bit about that later. But they are, like John said, they have so many singles that work, and they've had so much kind of more hits than misses. I mean, I guess at least in the early part of their career, that carries them through, and I can understand why they were so popular. So do I like this as much as some of the other early 80s albums that we've listened to? No, I think it's slightly less interesting than some of the other stuff, like Simple Minds or some of the other things that are kind of bridging that line between art rock and all the post-punk stuff that we've listened to. I think I like more, but this is on that line of I totally get why it's popular, and I have no problem listening to it. So
yeah, they were like the heartthrob.
Yes, that was the other.
They're kind of like a boy band, like
teen idols for sure.
Like the Beatlemania almost, like you said, the Fab Five. Like the Britain, like that was certainly part. I mean, they were very image conscious, about the videos, their dress, and they were they were like crazy 80s hair, but they were good looking dudes that and so it fit well with that the popularity. That makes sense. I'm surprised that this is ranked 92 of the decade, because I never thought that Duran Duran was a critically acclaimed band, so I was kind of surprised to see that on here. And I also knew that like going into this, I'm like, it's going to be hard for me to be objective on this, because it's not there's too much of me in this album, it's interesting, playing it in context and listening to it again after with all these other records, but yeah, it's kind of
just
interesting.
Listen to Josh and I then.
Yeah,
there's no nostalgia for either of us. I don't think so.
Yeah, I didn't know the album outside of the 2 singles, so it was kind of coming into them fresh.
Yeah.
But yeah,
it's interesting that we all got to the same sort of general thing from completely different views of Duran Duran. Like Josh did the research and connected. Matt had these childhood things, and I sort of was at the end. We kind of all said, yeah, pretty much the same without even communicating with each other. So I don't know what that says about Duran. The Duran Duran. Probably it's a good thing, right? Because it means that there's a sensibility that runs through their music.
Well, and sometimes music can just be like, it's got a good hook. It's catchy. It's danceable. I mean, I didn't listen to all the other mega mixes and all that stuff. When I see albums that do that, I'm just like, then no, I there's very few songs that I want to hear 5 different versions of. You know what I mean? Like, it's not.
I'm the same way.
I'm not. I mean, maybe if you go clubbing or whatever, that's like your thing, and you want to hear like a 10-minute version of "Hungry Like the Wolf." Okay, but like, for the most, I don't need to go down that. Yeah.
I'm not interested in the other versions, but I do find it interesting to listen to the regular and then the remastered. I find that to be really interesting, because sometimes it can completely. I always think of that Stooges album that was like a completely different album when I listened to it. So you'll find some gems in there. So I'm glad I did it once Josh shared that they remixed their albums. I was curious to see.
Yeah, and I listened to it too because it was so tied into this album and kind of their popularity in the U.S. And I thought it was different than what we've talked about with other bands as well.
Yeah.
Any final thoughts before I give this somewhat long postscript on them?
No.
Okay.
I have none.
So in '83, they kind of really blew up. They started out. They played the New Year's MTV Rock and Roll Ball, the New Year's Eve of '82 into '83. They re-released their first album in the U.S. with a new single called "Is There Something I Should Know," which increased their popularity even more. They were guest VJs on MTV, and Andy Warhol dropped by to say hi.
Of course.
Rhodes had said that after Hungry Like the Wolf became popular, there was like Beatlemania for them. They were doing a signing of Girls on Film, the video, in Times Square, and couldn't get out of the store, and the police had to block off the street. In '83, I thought this was hilarious. They also became tax exiles and lived in France, just like the Rolling Stones and many other bands that we've talked about.
It's very British of them. Yeah.
With their third album, Seven and the Ragged Tiger, that was released in November of '83, they now had 5 different top 20 hits from 3 different albums in the same year. I thought that was remarkable. They made headlines by releasing the single Union of the Snake on video on MTV a week before the song even debuted on the radio, so that was unusual as well. And they had their first number 1 single with first number 1 U.S. Single with the Reflex from that album. And so just to correct you slightly, Matt, that's when Nile Rodgers came in on that album. He wasn't involved in the production on Rio.
Okay. At some point I knew he produced. I wasn't sure where.
Yep. They went on a worldwide tour in '84 and released a concert film titled Arena, along with the live album that Matt mentioned, that had the single Wild Boys. That reached number 2 in the US and the UK. They appeared on the cover of Rolling Stone in February of '84, and they won 2 Grammys, including the first Grammy for Best Music Video, originally called Best Short Form, for Girls on Film and Hungry Like the Wolf, and Best Video Film, which is basically, from what I was trying to read, anything that was released for sale that you could buy, like concert or video footage or documentary. They won for that for a film called Duran Duran, which was the compilation of their first 11 videos. And at the end of '84, they appeared in Band-Aid's single "Do You Know It's Christmas." So they in '85, the band was kind of in a holding pattern due to everything that was going on and their constant touring, and I think drugs were involved at some point. Also, I wanted to mention that they were in their early 20s in '82 when Rio came out, so they were very much still young. John and Andy Taylor formed a super group with Robert Palmer and Tony Thompson of Chic called Power Station, which I had never heard of. And they had 2 top 10 singles from that called Some Like It Hot and a cover of T-Rex's Get It On, Bang a Gong. Both of which was that's a very funky album. I listened to those songs and but I was
never heard them before, Josh?
No. I was underwhelmed by by the singles.
And some sweat when the heat is on. John, that has the real fake drumming.
Yes, my least favorite type of drumming in the world, super synth drum. Yep.
Laban and Rhodes then formed their own new wave band called Arcadia. And released released an LP called So Red the Rose with the single Election Day.
Do you know that song? Did you listen to that song, Josh? Election Day is a cool song.
No, I didn't listen to that. So this is kind of when, Rhodes said they were never the same after the break when they went and formed their groups. He said that the groups were commercial suicide and that Duran Duran was never the same after that. However, they still kept it together and released A View to a Kill in '85 for the James Bond film of the same name. This is the first and still only Bond theme to go #1 on the charts in the U.S. And at the same time, it's the highest Bond theme. It reached #2 in the U.K. That has since been surpassed in the UK by Sam Smith's song Writing on the Wall for the Spectre movie, and Billie Eilish's song for No Time to Die also reached #1 in the UK. It was the last song that the original 5 of them recorded for almost 20 years at this point in '85. And then on July 13th, 1985, they performed at Live Aid, the charity concert in Philadelphia, to an estimated 90,000 people and 1.5 billion TV viewers worldwide. It was their unintentional final performance for about 20 years. They had planned to take a break due to nonstop touring and appearances, but then they didn't end up. They didn't continue on in this iteration until July of 2003. Laban infamously hit an off-key falsetto note in A View to a Kill at Live Aid, and the press called it the bum note heard around the world, in contrast to Freddie Mercury's note heard around the world at the Wembley Stadium performance for Live Aid, and he cites that as the most embarrassing moment of his career. I watched it on YouTube. I'm surprised more artists don't do it, honestly.
Really?
It's kind of just one note, and it gets corrected, but I mean, it's noticeable, but I was like, I don't care. Who cares?
It's not that bad.
Yeah.
Have you ever seen the British when somebody makes a mistake in soccer? They're brutal. It's like I can only imagine. It's like
Roger Taylor and Andy Taylor then left the band due to tension and exhaustion. They then got new members and they released the album Notorious, but it didn't do as well as previous albums. They were also struggling to escape their teen idol image and gain respect from critics for making more complex music. They were going through managers frequently and self-managing themselves at times, and then EMI seemed to kind of lose interest in promoting the band due to corporate restructuring and firing the president. They released an album called Big Thing in 1988. And then I'm really summarizing, they continued on in various iterations through the 90s, touring and releasing albums. They had a resurgence in the early 2000s when the original lineup reunited and they went on a world tour. I think nostalgia was fully in effect here at this time. They received Go ahead, John.
I'll defend that 190s album, because Ordinary World and Come Undone were pretty big songs. I remember them being
self-titled The Wedding Album. Yeah.
So it wasn't like they totally were off the grid, because I can remember those songs in heavy rotation.
Yeah, they were pretty big. That's true.
Yeah. They were. I mean, to be fair, they were still definitely making music and producing things. What was I going to say? They received a Lifetime Achievement Award at the 2003 MTV Video Music Awards, and they released the album Astronaut in 2004, and the first single, Reach Up for the Sunrise, reached #1 on the US Billboard Dance Chart and 5 on the UK Singles, their highest since A View to a Kill. In 2012, they headlined the opening ceremonies at the Summer Olympic Games in London. In December 2016, they lost a court case in Britain attempting to reclaim the U.S. copyright on their first 3 albums from EMI. So that's a cautionary tale. Obviously, those 3 albums are probably where the big money is.
Yeah.
So unfortunately for them. They are still making music. They released an album called Future Past, released on October of 2021. That's their most recent thing. And I'm happy to report that all 5 members are still alive, and these dudes are all in their early 60s at this point. And finally, they topped the fan vote at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, and they will be inducted this year in November to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. So, short recap of their entire career, but I thought it was, especially with the James Bond stuff and all the stats of having 5 singles,